Hi, everybody. Welcome to the ArcGIS API for JavaScript key highlights of the last year. I'm joined here with Arno, Jeremy, Christian, Renee, and Jan. And together, we will be presenting a large collection of the tech sessions going on this week. So what we're doing this year for this session is it's a combination of what's new. So looking at the different work that went on in the last year, and then also a quick tour of the sessions you can attend to do a deeper dive into the different capabilities that we're talking about. So, and it's kind of a lightning talk approach where we'll be switching presenters a lot and going through a lot of slides. Everything's purely live. So hopefully it'll be a nice dynamic session for you and you'll get a good tour of what we'll be talking about this week. So to kick it off, we'll talk about vector tiles and feature layers, and there's been a lot of really great work that's gone on in the last year. As I'm sure everybody knows, we have vector tile base maps you can use. It comes with a ArcGIS Online has many great styles you can use in your apps just right away. You can customize them as you see fit. And over the last year, we've made improvements. And this is kind of an area where we do constant performance improvements and quality improvements. So as you navigate the map, the symbols fade in and out. That's one of the updates. And as I mentioned, you can create your own custom styles. Another improvement we did in the last year is improving our label deconfliction algorithms. And this has really helped along tile boundaries or overlapping symbols. So a lot of work is constantly going into vector tile layers to make them more performant, higher quality as you move around the map and the overall experience of vector tile layers. So now I'm going to hand it off to Jeremy, who's going to talk about some of the really incredible improvements with feature layers performance. So Jeremy?
All right, thanks, Julie. Like we showed in the plenary this morning, we've been doing a lot to improve the performance, scalability, and the functionality with feature layers. These clouds moving on screen, what's pretty cool is it looks like a raster image, but actually that's just a feature layer where we've taken advantage of some of the layer effects to sort of blur things out, but give it that cloud-based effect. Feature layers are very flexible. They can be used for interactive applications like Anne showed in her plenary demo, or Christian, or dynamic thematic mapping, or just to know what's going on. I mean, they're extremely powerful and we've optimized performance greatly. Next. Here's a view of some of the optimizations we've done since last DevSummit. What's on the right is about 650,000 buildings in Southern California, and you see how fast those are loading up. And at 419, even better performance for point layers. So this is a demo of an application that Christian built for last year's demo. At the DevSummit last year, the app on the left actually took over a minute to load. Interactions while zooming in and out weren't very crisp. At the release that's coming out in the next couple of weeks, 419, it's extremely fast, loading in seconds, and a seamless performance as you're zooming in and around. Other fun note is the one on the left uses about 800 megabytes of memory. The one on the right uses about 50. So we really spent a lot to work on performance.
And now we'll hand it off to Christian to talk about visualization techniques.
Thanks a lot, Julie. So the ArcGIS API for JavaScript has a lot of visualization capabilities and that we take a lot of pride in. And one of those things is having these web style symbols part of the API. These are scalable vector symbols. So traditionally, if you want to display, say, a point of interest symbol, you might use a picture. And when you scale that picture, it can become pixelated and not look very good. Well, these web styles are true vectors. So as you scale it, they maintain a crisp, clean look. And we provide hundreds of these out of the box in the API as 2D web styles that you can simply reference with just a couple of lines of code within your application. Now, this guide page you see here is available in our documentation. So if you navigate to it, you can just click any of those symbols and copy that code and paste it directly into your app. And in addition to the 2D symbols, you actually have a set of 3D object symbols also at your disposal to use. So there's a lot of different things out of the box that you can create or reference within your applications. So what's new this year when it comes to symbology is actually the ability to use sim symbols, or sim symbol is basically the vector specification that we have for those points that we just showed, but you can also create line symbols with various styles and patterns and geometric effects. And it's not just lines, but fill patterns as well, as you see with Lake Tahoe there, and also those paths with those geometric effects and the trails surrounding Lake Tahoe. This is all new since the last DevSummit, so you can also take advantage of custom line endings to enhance your visualizations. So we now support it for all geometry types. Next. So as Jeremy showed just a couple of minutes ago, we've spent a lot of time in improving performance. This allows you to build dynamic interactive mapping applications. So using any smart mapping style or renderer, you can actually change that, point to a different data value with very fast performance, even up to 60 frames per second. So we've got a number of sessions this conference that will show applications that are highly interactive in this nature. And another way to visualize your data is by using point clustering. This is a way of reducing clutter in your visualization. So if you have hundreds, thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of points, you can enable clustering and they will group them spatially in ways that make sense. So clustering has been supported for a few years now, but within the last year, we added things such as labels. So you can see the count of the features or even other summary attributes for each cluster, however you want to configure that. We also just added in this last release in December 4.19, or actually in 4.19, which is coming out soon, we're adding the ability to access features and browse them by default within the pop-up. So that's pretty exciting. So you can display not just statistics, but you can actually browse individual features within the cluster and view the pop-up information for it. So I'm going to go ahead and just walk through a couple of sessions or a few sessions that will highlight some of these things. This session that Anne and I will present on dynamic vector symbology, we'll talk about the web styles I just mentioned, but we'll also dive into the sim specification and how to create those symbols from scratch if you so desire. So you don't need to just use the out-of-the-box symbols. You can create your own dynamic web symbols. We'll also walk you through how to publish those from Pro so you can use it in your organization and online or in the custom JavaScript application. But you can also create these dynamic multi-layer visualizations. So in this particular map here, this is actually showing election data from the last 2020 election and how the voting shifted in each party. So we're using a multi-part data-driven symbol. So you can create some pretty complex dynamic maps using this symbology, and we'll walk through the code and show you how to do this in your own apps. There's also this session that I recommend, ArcGIS API for JavaScript 2D visualization. Jeremy and I will walk through not every single style, but the majority of the mapping styles available. So it's very much a session that kind of takes you 10,000 feet above the visualization capabilities so you can get a sense of what's available and what you would want to do. We cover things such as blend modes, visual effects, sim, animations, and how to use Arcade to create data-driven visualizations. And finally, we're also presenting, Andrel and myself, this session called Data-Driven Animations. This will walk you through basically 3 different approaches to animations. There's these data filters, such as this one, where you can filter moving data, such as hurricanes, or maybe it's vehicles or something of that nature. You can also animate based off of a visual variable, such as color or opacity, to have a nice smooth effect. Or you can also animate based off of a data variable. So you can think of this as like country data or election data for for areas that don't change over time, but the data does change. Maybe it's sensors along a stream. We'll show you techniques and ways that you can structure your data that make that easy to use in our API. Okay, I'll go ahead and pass it. Yep.
Thanks, Christian. So this session is covering everything about real-time, or not everything about, but a lot about consuming real-time data. In the last year, we've made some improvements to what you can do. So basically, when it comes to visualizing real-time data, you can have streams that's pumping out, millions of updates at a time that your client may not be able to handle. So one of the updates in the API is the ability to throttle that stream. Actually, it does it automatically so that your app can continue to run. It shows the latest update it has, able to display regardless of the client spec. And regardless of how fast your stream is pushing out updates, your app will continue to work. Another update that we did in the last year is the ability to consume custom stream layers. So from custom WebSockets. So you might be familiar with ArcGIS Velocity and GeoEvent Server. These are the ArcGIS products that we have for working with real-time data. They're server side, really powerful, robust systems. One is more in the cloud, ArcGIS Velocity, and then you have GeoEvent Server for more on-premise solutions. So both of those have been something we've been supporting via the stream service and in our stream layer in the API. So now you'll also have the ability to wire up a custom WebSocket where you can consume data really from anywhere that's coming in live. So what we're going to do in this session is talk about the different visualization techniques you have available. For example, both 2D and 3D. So client-side geometric operations to detect when one feature is closer to another feature, just do different geometric testing, and then update the visualization based on that. We also have the engineer that worked on the stream layer implementation presenting, and he'll be talking about the work that he has ongoing and what is coming next for the stream layer. There's a lot more visualization session. This is clearly an area that we're really passionate about. If you need to work with large data sets, I highly recommend that first session there for best practices for building web apps that visualize large data sets. It's going to talk about best practices that you really should know in terms of the visualization and also optimizations you can do for performance. There's also a session on Arcade, as Christian mentioned. He uses that a lot in the demos you've already seen in these slides. So if you want to learn more about Arcade, there's a session for that. Also, the case studies of immersive apps for exploring data. Christian and Jeremy have built, I think there's 3 different specific apps they built with really interactive workflows, and they'll talk about how they built it and how you can create really dynamic applications in your app as well. You can do a deep dive on clustering. That's an on-demand session, so you can watch it anytime. If you're an advanced developer and you want to use WebGL to create your own custom visualization in a 2D map view, 2 of our top WebGL developers are presenting this session, and they've done some pretty incredible demos to show you how you can really create any custom visualization you want using WebGL in 2D. And finally, there's a session that covers everything you want to know about a feature layer. So if you're new to working with feature layers, this is a great session because it's going to cover all the types of data that a feature layer can work with, the different visualization techniques, and kind of give you a broad overview of working with stream layer. Feature layer. All right, so next we'll transition to 3D, and I'll hand it off to Arno.
Thanks, Julie. So yeah, in 3D, one of the recent improvements is adding better transparency. We always supported transparency in 3D, but there were situations where visualizing multiple transparent layers on top of each other caused some features not to render. This is fixed now with a technique called ordered independent transparency. And you can really make use of it, showing numerous features on top of each other that would normally be occluded using various amounts of transparency. And with the upcoming 4.19 release, this is also the case involving semi-transparent or semi-transparent terrain. Next slide, please. So one of the focus areas in the last year were definitely integrated mesh capabilities. The power in integrated mesh layers comes from combining realistic representations of the world with traditional GIS data layers containing points, lines, and polygons. Next slide, please, for a sample of that. So we see here an integrated mesh layer of Frankfurt. And even if your GIS data doesn't have set values, we can still align it to the mesh, providing more context. But also like polygon geometries like this water layer. Maybe you can pause real quick, Julie, this is going fairly quick. Yeah, water layer containing reflections. Yeah, thank you, something we've added in the last year. Besides configuring the watercolor and wave strength. Play please. Another symbol type are polygon patterns that you can use in 3D to drape on top of your integrated mesh to still show the underlying imagery. And you can also use the same geometries to apply modifications to your mesh on the client directly. That's something we've seen in the plenary. For example, to replace it with a 3D building, as here in a building scene layer. Yeah, and this is all done on the client side, so it's the same mesh. It's just the appearance changed on the client side, so it's yeah, you don't have to change any of the underlying data. Next slide, please. So these topics. Looks like it's starting from the beginning again. Thank you. So these topics and others is something that my colleagues, Luca and Sasha, are going to present in the 3D visualization session tomorrow, Wednesday. Yeah, with a bunch of samples and live code demos, so definitely check it out. Over to you, Jan.
Yes, over the last year, we added a few new cartographic techniques in 2D that you can find traditionally in raster and vector graphics applications like Photoshop, Illustrator, GIMP, Inkscape. So these are blend modes and layer effects. Next. So the blend modes was introduced. The blend mode was introduced in 4.16, so last year. It allows you to control how a layer color blends with the the layers that are below it. So in this, for example, in this slide, you can see on the left there is two images. One is the topo layer, the hillshade layer, and then on top we want to have this vector data. And then by setting a multiply blend mode, we can make sure that the vector colors blend nicely with the topo, the hillshade underneath. Before that, you had to control the, you had to set the transparency, the opacity of the vector layer, but then it was washing off the colors. But right now with the multiply blend mode, it really makes the two colors blend nice together. So there are like 35 blend modes and they apply to all the layer types in 2D. Next. So this is an example of blend mode applied. Here we have the percentage of ownership by census tract. Can you play the video? Yes. And then underneath we have the building footprints as a raster tile layer. So now I can change the blend mode to apply the color of the census tract layer on the under building footprint. So now we can really see the building footprint colorized by the percentage of ownership. So the blend modes really like create like those very interesting new visualizations. We also introduced in 4.18 the layer effects. So here in this, we have 11 new layer effects. This one is a bloom. So each feature can now shine like lights. Those are effects that you can find also in those graphics applications. We have 11 new effects and they apply also to all the layer types. Next. So we modified this application where you can see the construction of the buildings of New York. The buildings that are built for a specific year, they appear in bright blue. And then as they get older, they decay into like a more purplish color. So we apply also this bloom effect on the blue color, so that now you really see those new buildings like popping, and it's very eye-catchy. So that's really nice. Next. Finally, we have another example here with an application where the user can click on a country, and we want to really make the country stand out. So we use a blur on the base map, and we use also a brightness effect to make it darker. And then on the country that the user selected, we use the blend mode to just cut that country. And then also a drop shadow effect. So now we have this sort of bouquet kind of picture effect. It's really fancy. Next. And this is the application also that Jeremy showed earlier. We apply a blur effect on the smoke polygons, the smoke forecast polygons. And it's the blur effect here is very nice because smoke, we can't really define it by a polygon. So we can represent this uncertainty where the smoke is by blurring the polygon. And that has a very nice effect. Next, please. So I present a session with my colleague Andrew about everything you have to know about blend modes and effects. We are going to go over all the blend modes that are in those 6 main categories: lighten, darken, contrast, component, composite, and invert. We try to, you can use those effects and blend modes as an artistic effect, but also we try to give you clues about how to use them to enhance the data visualization in a meaningful way. Then after in the presentation, we talk about the 11 blend mode, the layer effects that you can also apply to features. So that would be very interesting there. And we give you some tips and tricks for both blend modes and effects, and also lots of demos. So please, check out this session. And then I leave it to Julie?
To Jeremy.
To Jeremy.
All right. Thanks, John. That was great. Excited to see those. So the client-side analysis capabilities, also imagery layers have gotten smarter. So this year, we've introduced the imagery tile layer, and this delivers imagery data not as colors to be displayed, but as their actual data. And when that data is delivered to the client side, that means you have control over how it's visualized. Like in this example, where changing the exaggeration or changing the sun altitude or azimuth. This is supported on imagery tile layers and imagery layers. And it allows you to leverage the power of the client to create those dynamic visualizations. Next. This can also, you can take that imagery data and use it to render features, like rendering the directions here of wind flow. Or you can use the filtering capabilities, combine it with a blend to create this kind of interesting visualization. Jan built this app. I think it's awesome. He's applying the filter to just draw the elevation pixels that are within a certain elevation value, and enabling blend to create that artistic visual by blending that into the base map. Julie, do I do this one? Sorry.
So now this is Arno to talk about the elevation.
Cool.
Exactly. Thanks. Yeah, this is already presented in plenary. New elevation profile we added that works in 2D and 3D. which allows you, for example, to select existing lines. Is the video playing? Perfect, thank you. And yeah, select existing lines, for example, one of the hikes here going from the Grand Canyon Village. And the elevation profile will show you a chart, and besides that, also a bunch of stats about the distance, slope, and change of elevation on the line. You can see here how the line kind of decreases constantly in elevation compared to its shape going up with all the turns. And hovering over the chart kind of shows you where that point is in the scene. Next slide, please. So, next slide, please. Thank you. So besides terrain, this is another movie, thank you. The elevation profile also supports 3D objects in the scene. So by adding a view profile chart to the chart, it will show the elevation of buildings as here in Paris relative to the ground. Like you can see the height of the church there compared to the terrain. And yeah, looking at different famous landmarks of this 3D building layer of Paris, we can try out another client-side analytics capability we added for the upcoming release called Shadow Highlight. For example, to understand the shadow impact of the Eiffel Tower. And by configuring a shadow highlight, you can see what part of the shadow is added by the highlighted building specifically, as in this case, the Eiffel Tower. There we go. And it will, yeah, you can differentiate between the shadow that is added by the building specifically, or that one that was already casted by other buildings. Yeah, which works nicely in combination with the daylight widget. Thank you. Next slide, that's it. So these and other client-side 3D capabilities is something that Hugo and Miriam present in their client-side 3D analysis session on Thursday.
We have some other sessions about client-side analysis. So the first one is really great. If you haven't used our client-side capabilities before and you want to learn the programming patterns for how you work with data on the client, there's specific things you need to know how to do. And so you can do client-side queries, filters, analysis, and that's what really powers a lot of these really interactive workflows, since you're doing everything on the client. API runs a full spatial database in the client, so you can run any spatial query or attribute query and statistics. You can do all that in the client, and this session will cover those different techniques and capabilities through demonstrations, and show you some code of how to do it. Next, there's also a session about imagery. This one is on demand, so you can watch anytime. As you might know, there's an announcement about hosted imagery, so you can actually host your imagery as tiles in ArcGIS Online. And this session is all about how you can take advantage of those in the client and JavaScript API, perform some of that cool client-side analysis using imagery. Okay, now we're going to move to building the right experience with new tools. This is all about your UI UX. As many of you guys know, we have a widget development model that essentially separates the business logic from the presentation layer, which gives you the ability to either just use the widgets out of the box and simply place them in your application, or you can customize them. So the one in the middle, you see the legend. This is actually provided in the API. It's an alternative view on top of the legend widget. And then the one on the far right is a full customization of the legend. That's actually in one of our templates. And so there's, every release we're working on widgets. We're either improving the existing ones. In the last year, we worked on the print widget and feature table. There's new widgets introduced, like the one that Arno showed, the elevation profile widget, table list widget. a lot of work has gone on throughout the API with widgets. One of the improvements that came towards the end of last year was in the pop-up, and this is also an area that we're constantly improving the pop-up. You'll see a lot of updates throughout the year. I was impressed how much work we can do on the pop-up to make it really fine-tuned. But now you can actually add a custom content type easily, so you can really put anything you want, any kind of element you'd like inside of a pop-up easily using the custom content type. You might be familiar with the other ones, which are like the attribute table list or a media like a chart. And this is just another type, so you can put anything you want. And this particular one is looking at just put the search widget inside the pop-up. There's a blog you guys can read if you want to know all about the different customizations you can do as developers with pop-ups. Of course, there's so much you can do just in the authoring experience in ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Enterprise, or directly as developers, but then there's even more you can do because you're doing web development. There's so much more you can do just directly through the API, and that's what this blog's aimed to cover. So one of the sessions you might be interested in if you want to learn about building widgets is the Building Your Own Widget presented by Matt and Juan Carlos Franco. They are kind of our widget guys on the team. They do a lot of widget work. And what this particular session will cover is basically the widget fundamentals. So how are they architected, creating classes, how the widgets work. So just understanding the widget architecture in the API and how you can create your own widget. Oh, this is actually an animation, just remembered. What their example they're going to build is just showing how you can play around with some of the effects that Jan was demonstrating. It's just really just the focus is to teach about creating a new widget, but that's the example they used. And then in their other session, they take that same example and show how you can customize widgets. So this is something you'd be interested in if you wanted, for example, to take an API widget and put your own presentation layer on top of that. We share the source code for all the widget views in GitHub, so you can use that and customize it or replace it. And this session is geared to help you learn how to do that, really create your own customized version of widgets. So they're going to go and take the widget you saw in the previous example and then customize it. And actually they're using Calcite, our design system, to give it kind of a nice look and show you the process of doing customization of widgets. Now we'll talk about editing. I'll hand it off to Arno.
Yeah, another topic we continue to invest a lot of effort in 2D and 3D is editing. After introducing 3D feature layer editing at DevSummit last year. Next slide, please. Or next, yeah. Oh, you skipped the picture there. One back. Yeah, thank you. One of the things we allow now is editing the attributes of features of a scene layer. These edits will be written to the associated feature layer first and have to be updated in the scene layer cache, which you can do directly in ArcGIS Online. But until that happens, the JavaScript API will automatically fetch these edits from the associated feature layer and use them to visualize the 3D scene layer features. Next slide, please. One of the highlights we already presented in the plenary is snapping, which is an exciting capability available in 2D and 3D with the upcoming 4.19 release. It allows you to do self-snapping, something we call self-snapping, where the lines or polygons snap to right angles or parallel lines. But you can also configure it to snap to other layers in your map. For example, feature layer graphics, GeoJSON layers, and yeah, snap vertices or points to these layers that are shown on your map. That works in 2D and 3D. Over to you, Jeremy.
Yep, there's been a lot of work on smart forms. So if you've been using the Field Maps app, you probably noticed that you have some more capabilities. That includes, if we go from left to right here, the ability to group questions that you want to ask people. So I see this residence and insurance information section on the one on the far left. As I expand it, I see more questions that are asked. I also see different types of controls. Like in this case for the detached home, it asked me a couple of yes or no questions. So those are options. So that's a new display type that you can make use of. And in the future, that'll be expanded to include things like sliders and switches and so forth. You know, while what's cool about these forms is that they are authored as part of the web map experience. So using the Field Maps app to get your map ready to take to the field. But what's cool about it is it just works directly in the JavaScript API. So the JavaScript API editor knows how to understand the rules on that form. And those forms include the ability to group, like I said before, the ability to write expressions to do conditional visibility, like only ask this question if this is true, and gives you the ability to add more information like you see on the one on the far right. So yeah, I think that's it.
So we got 2 sessions on editing. First one, web editing in 3D, where my colleague Roman and me are going to go over a bunch of the specifics involved with 3D editing, and also look at different examples, what you can do with 3D editing combined with different layer types, feature layers, but also 3D specific layer, scene layers. Yeah, and then this session is tomorrow on Wednesday. And next slide, please. 2D1, that basically covers the same topics specific to 2D. And on top of that also goes into extending some of the editor capabilities of the JavaScript API to implement custom editing workflows for your web apps. Yep, next slide, please.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the design system. So you might have seen in plenary that we are releasing the calcite design system, which is ESRI's, for a while, ESRI's internal design system that we use for our own web apps and applications. And we're making this available on April 22nd, so you can go and develop our website and start using it and really take advantage of a wide variety of UI components. These are really the UI building blocks for your application, like you probably saw the accordion, but there's other things like tabs and radio buttons and date pickers and all the little pieces that really compose of the UI experience, oftentimes outside of the map. There's a rich library of icons. There's 1,400 of them that you can use really easily in your applications. So yeah, you can build really consistent applications using a design system. The consistency combined with the really nice look and feel and the responsiveness just kind of makes it quicker to build a really nice looking app. So that's what it's really geared for. And then also in the developer website, you can go in and like turn the knobs and kind of see how the component adjusts and really kind of get a feel for what it's going to look like in the application. And then you copy the code, you can put it directly into your app. So we have 3 sessions that are about the design system. The first one, I highly recommend, if you're interested in this, that this is a really good one to attend because we will cover basically an overview of all the resources. We will show you the app that I demonstrated in plenary and pick it apart, kind of show you all the different pieces that make it work, both from the application, just the HTML of how we scaffold it to how it's integrated with the JavaScript API and how they work together. And then talk about from design to building your app workflow. So using Sketch, if you're a designer, or if you use Sketch or one of the other common UI kits like Figma and Adobe XD, how you can go and use that designer application and then hand it over to your development team. They can use these UI components, colors, and icons, and everything to build their app. So we're going to go from start to finish, kind of from an overview down to deep into the code of how it all works. Oh, and I actually forgot this was a demo. But I'll go ahead and skip that in the interest of time. So this is another session, and this one is fully focused on the web component library. So these are all the UI components, which are web components. They're going to talk about both like how you can build a mapping focused application, or maybe you're building just a forms-based application and there's no map, and how you basically can use the components in different ways for your applications. They'll talk about accessibility and localization. There's right to left support, and just their guidance and techniques of using this. And these are the presenters are some of the key developers that worked on the design system. So this is a cool session to attend. This next session is really focused more heavily for designers. Brian is one of the main designers that works on Calcite. So he'll talk about, you're seeing the screenshot of the Sketch UI. He'll show how you can use the UI kit in Sketch, talk about colors and themes, and all of the techniques that designers might want to know. Then he'll hand it over to Adam, who will talk about more ways that you can create themes and build in a design, your design, into your application with Calcite. And now I think this is Renee. I'm going to to Renee to talk about these modules.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. So we have all these really cool features and capabilities of the JavaScript API that have come out this past year or so. And we also want to focus on developer ergonomics, right? So how can we make it easier for you as developers to get started using the API? So next slide, Julie. So what we want to do is we've released the ESM build previously in beta as an NPM package, the same way that we released the AMD build also as an AMD package. So it makes it much easier for you to integrate it with your applications. The big difference is that the ArcGIS core ESM build doesn't necessarily require the Webpack plugin that we previously need for the AMD build. You could just integrate it directly into the build tools, your framework of choice. A bunch of these framework CLIs are available for doing builds. So it's much easier to integrate it and build apps the way you want to do. Now, we have a few samples on GitHub under the JS API resources repo. We have a whole folder dedicated to how to use the ESM build of the API to go ahead and use it in different frameworks, build tools, even Node.js, which is really cool too, that we've gotten requests from people of how to use our API inside of Node. And that's something that you can actually start doing today. And with the 4.19 release, that is going to be coming out of beta. So it's actually going to be a full-fledged release at that point. So we have some sessions coming up during DevSummit this week that will kind of help you out to get started with ESM. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. So next slide, Julie. So the first session that we have is building apps with ESM. So I'll be talking about how to start from scratch with the ESM build to build your apps. ES modules are the standard JavaScript module system. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you want to use them. The build tools will support it. Browsers have native support for it, right? So you could use our ESM CDN. Now we do have a key point there. It's the fact that even though you could use the ESM CDN to build your apps, we only recommend it for prototyping your apps, because if you think about it, it's completely unbuilt files. You'll be loading hundreds of files at runtime when you use it. So it's really just for doing quick and dirty testing of some features you might want to get done. But the fact that you could do it is pretty cool. Just once you've done it, go ahead and port that over to a build tool of some sort and then build your app from there. So we'll be talking about how you can do that inside of this session. One other key thing that is different in the session that was going to be different from release is that you no longer have to copy the assets locally when you do your build. By default, the assets are going to be loaded from the CDN. And those assets are going to include things like web workers, fonts, styles, language files, and various static assets like that. So keep that in mind when you do watch that session. And I'll talk more a bit about that in the Q&A for that one as well. Next slide. So one of the big requests we get is how can I build apps with React? Because React is a very popular library out there. So we definitely have a session on how you can do that. And you can see we have a small code snippet here showing how you would use modern React to build out your applications. So you can have custom components, you can integrate the API with your own hooks, you can even create custom hooks to use inside of React, which is a really cool feature. React also has a way that you can lazy load components. So we'll be talking about how you can take advantage of React Suspense, which is how they lazy load their components, and also dynamically lazy load parts of the API to make your applications more performant. We're also going to talk about state management, because with React, state management is incredibly flexible. You have a lot of different ways you can do it, whether you want to use React context to do it, or maybe you want to use a third-party library to handle your state management. You have those different options. We're going to focus on React context in this particular case, but I'll show you how you can handle that inside your apps. So next slide. So we're also going to have a session on PWAs, which are progressive web apps. So progressive web apps are, you get the benefit of performance with progressive web apps because their focus is mobile and offline first. And when you do that, the key there is to get the application loaded as quickly as possible. And you do that by loading all your critical resources, things like JavaScript, CSS, the bare minimum you need to see your app. An advantage here is that if your particular application does not display a map necessarily when the app loads, or you don't have to display a map, you could save yourself a lot of time on page loads by delaying that need to show the map and the code needed for the map until it's absolutely necessary. So that's what it means when you load the critical resources. That way you can render things incredibly quickly, which is what this diagram is showing. After that, you have the option of doing things like pre-caching assets. So code that will be loaded during runtime, but not necessarily when the app loads, could be pre-cached. You could do that using service workers and a couple other techniques. And then, of course, like we talked before, lazy loading pages. So maybe you're going to have a page that will show the feature table or an action that's going to load the feature table during application usage, but you don't want to have that code up front if you don't necessarily need it, because not all your users might want to see it when they load the app. So you can actually lazy load parts of the API for that as well, which is a really cool trick you can use in pretty much any framework. So let's go to the next slide, Julie. So options for consuming the API. So this one's kind of interesting. We're going to show all the different ways that we today have that you can use the API. So we're going to show how you can continue using AMD with the CDN to build your APIs, to build your applications. We're going to talk about ES modules, of course. We're also going to talk about how you can even still use ESRI Loader today if you want to do that, and how you can migrate your applications from ESRI Loader to using the ArcGIS core ESM build to build your apps, which is really cool. So you have, like I said, there's a lot of different ways here. Like I have listed here, we have ESM, we have AMD, we have CDN, ESM, CDN, AMD, NPM, ESM, and NPM, AMD. So you can't tell me that we don't have a way for you to build your apps with all these different choices that we have. And we're going to cover all of those in this particular session here. Julie? So Andy Gupp and Eric Pates are going to be talking about how to work with Angular. Angular is interesting. So unlike React, which is pretty much strictly a UI library, Angular is a full-fledged framework. It's great for enterprise application development because all of your developers are pretty much going to have to do things the framework way. So when you work in Angular, you're working the Angular way. It has everything kind of built in with it. You have some advantages there. You can take advantage of Angular material to build out your UI. So if you want to use the material theme with Angular, you can. It's got a very flexible UI layout. It's TypeScript first, which big fan of, right? We're the JavaScript API team, we're huge TypeScript fans. So that's a big benefit there. You get advantage of state management built in with Angular via NGRX, which is a reactive way to manage state inside of your applications. They're going to cover that, as well as how you can do testing. We get questions quite a bit on how to do testing with the JavaScript API. And so they're going to be talking about how you can use Jasmine to do testing with the API in Angular in this particular session. And next one, Julie. And this session just happened this morning, so you can always go back and look at the recording for this one. But we talk about the patterns and fundamentals of working with the JavaScript API. And this really gets down to some of the core concepts, things like working with maps and views, Accessor, which includes things like doing property watching. So instead of listening for particular events, just watching for properties to change during the life cycle of your app. Asynchronous tasks. So we have a lot of native promises in the API that you can work with. So that means they work across the board in all modern browsers. And they work with other libraries that work with promises as well, which is really cool. So I think that was all I had here for this slide. So I'll pass it back to Julie.
Okay, and we still even have more sessions beyond that. There's several more. One's focused on TypeScript. It's an on-demand session. And then there's a couple that are really good. These are both presented out of our professional services division. And so they're working on a lot of very big JavaScript projects, and they've really, become professionals at how to build enterprise applications. And so they're going to talk about the CI/CD pipeline, also the testing and the best practices there. So those are great sessions to attend. If you're new to web development and you're new to the API as well, there's a great session that's on demand, which is getting started, and it's also covering just web development basics of setting up your environment and debugging techniques. So that's always a popular session. And then there's a session that's actually right after this session, if you want to join us for the next one, which is, we have a lot of developers that are coming over to the API that are brand new to the API, and they're really attracted to using the platform location services. So this session is all about how you can leverage the ArcGIS platform services that were discussed in plenary, how the API keys work, and how you can leverage all of that with our JavaScript API. So you can attend that. And then there's 3 other sessions that I think will be of interest to a lot of people. The first one I think is really great. It's presented by Jan and Matt and Yaron, I believe. And they are going to talk about how they built the what's underneath the API, how it works. So some of the techniques of the modern browser technology that we use for rendering, the workers, kind of share with you some of the techniques they use so that you can even apply some of that smarts in your own applications. So that's a really, I think, incredible session. If you want to know about our roadmap, there's a Road Ahead session on Thursday, and we will just have a large group of people like we did in this session to show you demos and talk through the plan of what we're working on this year. So that's a good session if you want to know what's ahead. And then finally, I can see there's a lot of questions coming in this session, and we will have limited time to answer them. And throughout the week, you might have more and more questions that you have collected. Of course, you have the Ask Our Experts showcase where you can connect with the team. But this session is also dedicated. It's the last session one of the last sessions of the conference, and it's 100% dedicated just answering your questions. So what you do with the session is you go to the GeoNet place. You can just search for. Actually, if you go to my blog on the ArcGIS blog that I just published for web developers, there's a link to it. It might be the easiest way to find it. You go to GeoNet and you can post any question that you have, anything that didn't get answered, and we will go through those questions live and answer everything. So the entire session is dedicated to answering your questions. So you can attend that. Okay, and with that, we would love to get your feedback. If you like the way that we did it this year, where we combined the what's new and then showing you the different sessions that we're doing, what they're covering. If this was helpful for you, please let us know so we know to kind of take a similar approach next year, or if you have recommendations. We always spend a lot of time really giving careful attention to all of your feedback. So with that, I'll open it up to a couple questions that we might have. Jeremy, do you want to take the first one?
Sure. So a question in from Jim: do we need to upgrade ArcGIS server to a certain version to get the performance improvements of 4.19? And no, a lot of the performance improvements are happening under the hood in the way the JavaScript API works with features. Definitely protocol buffer format is you're going to see the biggest performance improvement. And, that's, it's been there for feature services for a while. I think for map services, it's a 10.8.1. An exciting thing that's coming out with 10.9 for enterprise hosted feature services is the ability to set up a feature tile cache, just like ArcGIS Online does. This allows you to increase the scalability of reaching different customers' apps by setting up a layer of caching within your enterprise. So.
Okay, there's a question. There's a couple of questions related to roadmap. There's a question: is there a public roadmap for upcoming features in the JavaScript API releases? We don't publish a long-term great way. Obviously, we have the road ahead session, but then another way to see the upcoming release is the next repo. And I can put the link in the chat. But basically, that gives you the ability, as we're making progress, next release, it's updated every Monday, I believe, once a week. You can try out any of the new features that we've documented in the repo, try out new apps. You can do regression testing. So we've opened that up. I think, was it last year, Jamie, or the year before? Now time's just kind of blending for me. But now you can access the next release via that repo. So it's a great way to kind of stay ahead and see what's coming for the next release. And if someone wants to take the next question, I'll get the link to that and put in the chat.
Let's see here. Christian, can you take can one cluster by area and by attribute?
Sure. Yeah, I actually wrote a response in the thread, but on the rendering engine only takes into account area. So if you want to render based on attribute, you will need to set a data filter on your layer so you can cluster by area and by attribute. That would be the way to handle that.
Cool. Julie, can you talk about the Calcite? There's a couple questions on Calcite. So is the Calcite GitHub repo deprecated or unsupported? And there's also a question about Calcite React. Maybe you just talk about Calcite in general.
Sure. So there are some existing repos, Calcite React, there's Calcite Web. These were just kind of early repos as we were in development throughout the years of kind of the internal design system we've been working on. Calcite React is out of professional services and they use it for their projects. Going forward, we are only having the Calcite components, and that's the web components that you'll be seeing us featuring during the conference. Everything, all of the resources that you'll need to build your app, you should be going to the developer website. So you have all the doc and you have code samples, you have that ability to turn the knobs and see the component adjust. So that's all in the developer site. And then if there's additional resources you need, the developer site will link out to other repos in GitHub. We do share the source code of all of the web components. So you also have access to that, and it's in the Calcite components. So I guess at the high level, the recommendation is to start in the developer website once it's released on April 22nd. That is the Calcite design system that we will be actively working on. And then it will link out to Calcite components and other repos as needed that are specific to the different resources. So yeah, definitely start using that once it's available in a couple of weeks.
Cool. I was going to ask, sorry, Julie, I was going to have Arno answer a couple of the 3D questions that came in. Arno?
Sure. I started to answer them by replies because I saw we're running out of time. Can we edit 3D scene layers? Yes, the attributes of a 3D scene layer can be edited provided you have an associated feature layer with corresponding access rights. I think I answered the other ones, so if you want to go to any other questions, but I think we're at a minute, so we're probably going to be cut off.
I think we're done, yeah. Thanks, Arno. Julie, you want to add?
I'm just gonna put the link to the chat in the link to the next repo for checking out the next release in the chat, so you guys can have a look at that.
Yeah, post that as a question, Julie, in the Slido.
Okay.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy your DevSummit week, and can't wait to see you next year at the DevSummit in person.